Hello, welcome back to Catholic Reboot. Today, which is May 14th, is the feast day of St. Boniface. Couple things regarding this saint. My my first start in the traditional Catholic Church actually began at St. Boniface in Pittsburgh. It was one of the largest Latin Mass communities in the country at that time. And you got to give a lot of credit to the faithful Catholics of Pittsburgh because they went through quite a bit since Vatican II to make that happen. They were shunned by the diocese for close to a decade or longer before that happened. And then as the uh, the city or the state was going to try to put a major highway through the property right where St. Boniface stood, they went to protect that church, and then lo and behold, it became one of the most beautiful centers for the traditional Latin Mass. It was originally a German neighborhood, which makes sense because St. Boniface is the patron saint to Germany, and I'll explain to you why that is. Um, and as always, the Germans did a great job at building their churches in the traditional days. But it also brings to mind, we just celebrated the Feast of the Ascension, and Christ had said to the apostles, "Go out, and preach my word and bring those people to me," right? And I like to say that I think with all that's going on in our world today, it's time for everyone to come back home to the Catholic Church. So, regardless if their ancestors or great ancestors left the church during the Protestant Reformation, or if they were Catholics and left for all these pop-up Catholic Bible Christian churches that are so big today, I think in order to battle what's necessary that's coming against Christ's church, everyone has to come back home, and we need to fight together. So, it's very important because I think through that unification, we can return the traditional Catholic Church to its roots, which is a great one holy apostolic church with great antiquities. And we have the use of the saints to fall back on and say, look at the faith they had, look what they did. You look at Saint Boniface; he was martyred at 80, so it's never too late to defend the church. Okay, with that said, I'm going to just kind of give a brief overview of the life of St. Boniface because I have a pretty long video clip that's going to follow. So, St. Boniface was born in 675, he died in 754. He was born in Winfrid in the Devon town of Cretan, which is an Anglo-Saxon, it was during the Anglo-Saxon period in England. He was a leading figure in the what they call the Anglo-Saxon mission to the Germanic parts of the Frankish Empire during the 8th century. Many people incorrectly think when they referred to the Frankish Empire that this was the prelude to France, but it wasn't. It was actually the prelude to two great countries. It was the Frankish Empire at that time was the largest post-Roman barbarian kingdom in Western Europe. The west part of Francia, of the Frankish Empire, uh, became France. The eastern part of Francia became Germany. It just so happens the Germans stake claim to St. Boniface as their patron, and I'll explain why. So he organized significant foundations for the church in Germany and was made Archbishop of Mainz by Pope Gregory III. He was martyred in Frisia in 754, along with 52 others, and his remains were returned to Fulda, where they rest in a sarcophagus, which became a pretty big pilgrimage site for the Germans. St. Boniface's life and death, as well as his work, became widely known. because there's just a wealth of material available even to today and legal documents and some of his sermons. He is venerated as the patron saint of Germania, known as the Apostle to the Germans. Now, Norman Cantor specifically noted three important roles that St. Boniface played in. One was the reform of the Frankish Church and the chief fermenter of the alliance between the papacy in Rome and the Carolingian family. The second was the reorganization and regulation of the Catholic Church for the Frankish Empire. And then he thirdly shaped the Latin Church in Europe, and many of the dioceses that he had proposed still remain today. So after his martyrdom, he was quickly hailed as a saint in Fulda and other areas in Germany and in England. He is still very much venerated strongly among German Catholics. I'd like to say he's probably rolling over in his grave with what's going on with with the Catholic Church in Germany. It's just become so liberal that it's barely being viewed as being part of the traditional Catholic Church. St. Boniface is celebrated as a missionary. He is regarded as a unifier of Europe and is regarded by the German Catholics as a national figure. So much so that in 2019, Devon County Council, with the support of both the Anglican and the Catholic churches in Exeter and Plymouth, officially recognized St. Boniface as the patron saint of Devon, right? Which is very befitting because it appears that what's going on right now in our world is he made many converts of the pagans, and it seems like we're returning back to our pagan roots. So this next video is quite long if you want to watch till its end. I think it's about 20 minutes, but it's a complete life on St. Boniface. So two things. Let's look at his life. Let's try to practice some of the same virtues he did. And above all, let's go out and get all those that left the Catholic Church and tell them to come back home, but come home to the traditional church, not the Novus Ordo Church. Thank you.
Welcome to the story of liberty. There's an account of a man named Winfrid, better known as Boniface. He had been termed the Apostle of Germany. He was born in 680 and was brought up in a monastery quite early in life. He went to Rome and received the commission from the Pope, and he labored among the heathen tribes of Germany. He preached in Saxony and Bavaria and Hesse, and in 745 he was appointed archbishop. There's a great story. While in Hesse, he came near the city of Geismar, where he found a great oak sacred to Thor, the German god of thunder. The people regarded the oak with deep feelings and reverence, and it was under its shadow that they met to worship. Boniface preached to them on the vanity of idols underneath that oak, and finally he decided to teach them an object lesson. With some of his helpers, he approached that tree with a large axe. The pagan people stood around with great excitement. When the first blow fell on that sacred tree, they expected that Thor would strike Boniface dead. Instead, the ancient story runs that a sudden gust of powerful wind broke that tree into 4 parts, which Boniface cut up into planks for the making of a church, the building of a new church. the people's faith in the power of this dreaded idol vanished away. No longer could they believe in these false teachings. Boniface and his friends continued to preach to them, and many of them accepted the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. Boniface was one of the great early missionaries in Europe.
Taken from the 4th edition, published in 1954. June 5th, St. Boniface, Archbishop of Mentz and Apostle of Germany. St. Boniface was born at Crediton or Cureton in Devonshire about the year 680, and at his baptism named Winifred. When he was but 5 years old, his chief delight was to hear holy men converse about God and heavenly things. The edifying deportment and holy instructions of certain pious monks who, being employed in preaching in that country, happened to come to his father's house, gave him a strong desire to devote himself to God in a religious state. And though he was then only a child, the deep impressions which their words left upon his heart were never after effaced. His father exerted his whole authority to divert him from his inclination to a monastic life, till, being visited by a dangerous sickness, he acknowledged in it the hand of God, chastising him for opposing his son's vocation, which he from that time gave him free leave to pursue. Winifred was educated from 13 years of age in the monastery of Exeter, under the holy abbot Wolford. With the study of grammar, he joined assiduous devout meditation, and the most rigorous observance of monastic discipline, even before he had professed that state, which he embraced before he left the aforesaid monastery. After he had spent there some years, the reputation of the schools and discipline of the monastery of Nutzel in the diocese of Winchester, under the learned abbot Winbert, drew him to that house. He made an extraordinary progress in poesy, rhetoric, history, and in the knowledge of scriptures, and was afterwards appointed by his abbot to teach the same sciences, of which duty he acquitted himself with great fruit to others, at the same time improving himself in the sciences with that redoubled advantage which maturity of years in judgment and a diligent review of a well-digested course of former studies gives to masters of an elevated genius. At 30 years of age, he was promoted to the order of priesthood, and from that time was chiefly employed in preaching the word of God to the people and in the care of souls. Such was his reputation that he was entrusted by his superiors with an important commission to Brithwald, Archbishop of Canterbury, by which means that prelate and the religious king Ina became acquainted with his extraordinary merit, and the bishops of the province from that time invited him to their synods, that they might be assisted by his learning and advice in their deliberations. The servant of God, burning with zeal for the divine honor and the salvation of souls, never ceased to bewail night and day the misfortune of those nations which lay benighted in the shades of idolatry. In these holy dispositions, after having long implored the light and blessing of heaven, he, with the leave of his abbot, passed over into Friesland to preach the gospel to the infidels in 716. But for the trial of his virtue, a war breaking out between Charles Martel, mayor of the French palace, and Radbod, king of Friesland, threw insuperable difficulties in his way. However, he advanced as far as Utrecht, then the capital city of that country, and addressed himself to King Radbod, but without success, and he was obliged to return to his monastery in England. Winbert dying soon after, Winifred was unanimously chosen abbot. He did all that lay in his power to decline this promotion, alleging that he was called to the conversion of infidels. Though he was not able then to prevail, he shortly after urged the same motive with such success as to engage Daniel, the learned and pious bishop of Winchester, to procure that his demission should be accepted, and another nominated abbot in his place. After having stayed 2 years in England, he set out for Rome in 719, and presented himself to Pope Gregory II, begging his apostolic blessing and authority that he might preach the faith to infidels. The Pope, fixing his eyes upon him, asked him if he brought with him commendatory letters from the diocesan. Hereupon Winifred delivered into his hands letter from the aforesaid Bishop Daniel, by which he was strongly recommended to his holiness. Gregory, having read them, and conversed some time with the saint, began to treat him with extraordinary marks of kindness and esteem, and gave him an ample commission to preach the faith to all the infidel nations of Germany. He bestowed on him many holy relics and dismissed him with his blessing and letters of recommendation to all Christian princes on his way. The holy missionary lost no time, but taking the road to Germany, crossed the lower Alps, and, traveling through Bavaria into Thuringia, there began his apostolic functions. He not only baptized great numbers of infidels, but also brought the Christians he found already established in Bavaria and in the provinces of adjoining to France, especially the priests and bishops, to reform many irregularities, and to live in a manner agreeable to the precepts of the gospel and the holy canons of the church. For the commends of the heathens had almost extinguished in them the sense of the pure maxims of their faith. Winifred, hearing soon after that by the death of Radbod, Charles Martel was become master of Friesland, and that a door was there opened for the preaching of the gospel, he hastened thither, and during 3 years joined his labors with St. Willibrord, to the great increase of the faith, till, understanding that St. Willibrord intended to make him his successor in the episcopal charge, he was alarmed and left that mission. For his excuse he alleged that the Pope had enjoined him a commission to preach the gospel to the heathens in Germany. From Friesland he went into Hesse and part of Saxony, and wherever he came baptized many thousands of idolaters, destroyed temples, and built churches. He acquainted Pope Gregory with this wonderful success by a letter, which he sent by one of his fellow laborers, and at the same time consulted his holiness upon several difficulties that occurred in his ministry. The Pope gave glory to God and congratulated him by a letter, in which he commanded him to repair to Rome. Winifred immediately obeyed the order and arrived there in 723. Gregory required of him a confession of his faith, as is usual with regard to bishops elect before their consecration. He likewise put to him several questions concerning his missions in converted countries, and after a few days ordained him bishop. Willibald says that on this occasion the Pope changed his rugged northern name of Winifred into that of Boniface, but he could only confirm that change, for we find by the saint's letters that he then bore the name of Boniface, joining with it that of Winifred. The saint took an oath to maintain the purity of faith and the unity of the Church, a copy of which, written with his own hand, he laid upon the tomb of St. Peter. Pope Gregory gave him a book of select canons of the Church to serve him for a rule in his conduct, and by letters recommended him to Charles Martel and to all bishops and princes wherever he should have occasion to travel. The saint, returning to his mission in Hesse, continued his spiritual conquest, and cut down a tall oak consecrated to Jupiter, the timber of which he employed in building a chapel in honor of the Prince of the Apostles. He founded many churches and a monastery at Erfurt. The harvest growing daily upon his hands, he procured a new supply of laborers from England, whom he stationed in Hesse and Thuringia. In 732, Gregory III succeeding in the pontificate, St. Boniface sent messengers to Rome to consult him upon several difficulties. Gregory showed these deputies great respect and sent by them a pall for St. Boniface to be used by him only when he celebrated the divine mysteries or consecrated bishops. He at that time constituted him archbishop and primate of all Germany, with power to erect new bishoprics where he should see it expedient. The saint went himself to Rome for the third time in 738 to visit the tombs of the apostles and to confer with his holiness about the churches he had founded. The Pope received him as a living saint and appointed him legate of the Apostolic See in Germany. Boniface, on his return to that country, was called into Bavaria by the Duke Odilo to reform several abuses. Finding only one bishopric in that country, namely Passau, he established 3 others, Salzburg, Freisingen, and Ratisbon, which division the Pope confirmed in 739. The Holy Primate soon after established 3 new bishoprics at Erfurt for Thuringia, or Baraburg for Hesse, since translated to the Paderborn, and at Würzburg for Franconia. He added a 4th at Achstatt, in the Palatinate of Bavaria. Gregory III dying in November 741, his successor Zachary, upon application made to him by St. Boniface, again confirmed all he had done in settling the Church of Germany. At that time happened a memorable revolution in France, in which that crown was transferred into a new family, fruitful in great princes and valiant heroes. Charles Martel, mayor of that palace, having governed France 26 years with great valor and prudence, having conquered Burgundy and Aquitaine, humbled the Saxons, and often defeated the Saracens, who made formidable invasions from their late settlements in Spain, died in 741, being 50 or 55 years old. Since the dignity of mayor of the palace was become hereditary, the title of Duke and Prince of France had been added to it. By the death of Charles, his eldest son, Carloman, became mayor and prince of Austrasia or Lorraine, and that part of Germany which was then subject to France. He subdued Odilo and Thierry, the former Duke of Bavaria and the latter of Saxony, and made them tributary. But it was his chief aim to consult by peace the happiness of his people, to protect religion, and to cultivate the useful arts. He bent his whole authority to second the zeal of our saint in all his undertakings. 2 impostors were stirred up by the devil to disturb the infant Church of Germany. The one, Adalbert, a Frenchman, pretended to know the secrets of hearts, gave his own hair and the paring of his nails as relics, and wrote his own life, filled with absurd pretended miracles, enthusiasm, and pride. The other, called Clement, a Scotsman, rejected the canons or the ecclesiastical laws, taught that Christ, in his descent into hell, delivered all the souls of the damned. He also held heterodox opinions concerning predestination. St. Boniface, in a council in Germany, condemned them both in 742. Carloman caused them to be confined in closed prison, and the sentence of our saint and his council was afterwards confirmed by the Pope in a synod at Rome in 745. St. Boniface held another council in 743 at Leptines, now Lessenes, a palace of the kings of Austrasia, near Ath, in the diocese of Cambrai. Prince Carloman, finding him a man full of the science of the saints and of the Spirit of God, listened to his advice in all things relating to the salvation of his soul. His brother, Perpin the Short, became mayor of the palace for the whole kingdom till, in 752, he was chosen king by the unanimous consent of the whole nation. The new king, desiring to be crowned by the most holy prelate in his dominions, insisted upon the ceremony being performed by St. Boniface. This was done at Soissons, where our saint presided in a synod of bishops, and all the states of the French kingdom assisted at the coronation. St. Boniface, in his first council in Germany, is styled legate of St. Peter. From the Council of Lessines and Soissons, he appears to have been legate of the Apostolic See in France, no less than in Germany. In 746, he entreated Pope Zachary to send a bishop legate into France, that he might be eased of that burden. The Pope refused to grant this request, but allowed him, by a singular privilege, to choose whom he thought best qualified to be his successor in Germany after his death. The saint had been some years Archbishop of Germany before he fixed his metropolitan see in any particular city. Cologne was at first judged the most proper, it being then the metropolis, but Gervilio, the Bishop of Mentz, having been deposed in a council, that city was pitched upon in 745. To assist him in planting the spirit of meekness and Christian piety in a fierce and uncivilized nation, St. Boniface invited over from England many holy men and religious women. Among these were St. Wigbert, St. Burchard, Bishop of Würzburg, and St. Willibald, Bishop of Eichstätt, and St. Lullus, and among the holy virgins were St. Leoba, our saint's cousin, St. Thecla, St. Walburga, St. Bertigida, and Contruda, to whom he committed the direction of several nunneries, which he erected in Thuringia, Bavaria, and other places. In 746 he laid the foundation of that great abbey of Fulda, or Fulden, which continued long the most renowned seminary of piety and learning in all that part of the world. The abbot is now a prince of the empire, lord of a very extensive territory, and is styled primate of all the abbots in Germany, and chancellor to the empress. St. Boniface had several years before founded a monastery at Friedislar in honor of St. Peter, another at Hammenburg in honor of St. Michael, and one at Ordorfe in honor of the same archangel, in all which the monks gained their livelihood by the labor of their hands. The pastoral care of so many churches did not hinder this holy man from extending his zeal to remote countries, especially to that which gave him birth. Ethelbald, king of Mercia, was a lover of justice and liberal to the poor, but sullied these virtues by abominable lusts, abstaining from matrimony, that he might wallow in filthy incontinency, and his scandalous example was imitated by many of his courtiers. St. Boniface, touched to the quick at the news of such scandals, in 745 wrote to this prince a strong remonstrance and exhortation to penance, putting him in mind how base it was for him to be the slave of lust to the injury of God, by whose benefit he ruled so great a nation, and how heinous a crime it was to set such an example of his subjects. He tells him that chastity is so highly prized among the pagan inhabitants of Old Saxony that if a married woman was convicted of adultery or a virgin of fornication, she was strangled and her body burnt. And he who had dishonored her was hanged over her grave, or she was scourged on her back by women and stabbed with knives, first in one village, then in the next, and so round the country till she expired under her torments. If Gentiles, who know not God, says the saint, have so great a zeal for chastity, what ought to be our sentiments who are a Christian and a king? He puts him in mind of the unhappy end of his predecessor, Selred, and of Osred, king of the Northumbrians, both addicted to this shameful vice, and both snatched away sudden death in the midst of their evil courses. from the gift of Croyland mentioned by Ingolfus, and from the laws of this king in favor of the church and of the abbey Rippenuden, Naturalist Alexander and some others think he became a sincere penitent. He was slain soon after, in 755, by Bjornred, a rebel who usurped his throne. St. Boniface wrote a circular letter to all the bishops, priests, deacons, canons, monks, nuns, and all the people of England, conjuring them earnestly to join in holy prayer, to beg of God, who desires that all may be saved, that he would vouchsafe in his infinite mercy to shower down his blessings upon the labors of all those who are employed in endeavoring to bring souls to his saving knowledge and holy love. He often desired books to be sent him from England, especially the works of Bede, whom he calls a lamp of the church. He entreated the abbess Edburga to send him the epistles of St. Peter written in letters of gold, to inspire carnal men with greater respect, and to satisfy his devotion to that apostle, whom he calls the patron of his mission. Writing to the abbot Adherius, he begs that he would cause the sacrifice of the Mass to be offered for the souls of those missionaries who were lately deceased. In several other epistles he mentions the mutual contract of charity between the missionaries abroad and the priests and monks in England, that they should reciprocally pray for the deceased brethren. In a letter to a nun, he mentions how much he had to suffer in his mission from the pagans, from false Christians, and even from ecclesiastics of debauched morals. Yet the ardor of his charity made him continually to thirst after greater sufferings, and especially after the honor of laying down his life for the love of him who died for us. In a letter to Cuthbert, Archbishop of Canterbury, treating of the duties of pastor, he says, "Let us fight for our Lord in these days of bitterness and affliction. If this be the will of God, let us die for the holy laws of our fathers, that we may arrive with him at the eternal inheritance. Let us not be dumb dogs, sleeping sentinels, hirelings that fly at the sight of the wolf, but watchful and diligent pastors, preaching to the great and small, to the rich and poor, to every age and condition, being instant in season and out of season." St. Boniface in his homilies most frequently inculcates the obligation and sanctity of the baptismal vows. This apostle of so many nations thought he had yet done nothing so long as he had not spilt his blood for Christ, and earnestly desired to attain to that happiness. Making use of the privilege which Pope Zachary had granted him of choosing his successor, he consecrated St. Lollis, an Englishman, formerly monk of Malmesbury, Archbishop of Mentz, in 754, leaving him to finish the churches which he had begun in Thuringia and that of Fulda, and conjuring him to apply himself strenuously to the conversion of the remaining idolaters. He wrote a letter to Fulrad, abbot of St. Denis, begging him to make this choice of St. Lollis agreeable to King Pepin, and, as his infirmities admonished him that he had not long to remain in this world, he conjured that prince to take into his favor the protection his disciples, who are almost all strangers, either priests dispersed in many places for the service of the church, or monks assembled in his little monastery, where they were employed in instructing children. He says that priests lived on the frontiers of the pagans, very poor and destitute, and that they were able to get their bread but not clothing unless they were assisted. Pepin granted his request, and Pope Stephen II confirmed his nomination of Lollis and his resignation of the see of Mentz, in order that he might go and preach the gospel to those nations which still remained unconverted. The saint, looking upon himself as devoted to labor in the conversion of infidels, and being at liberty to follow the call of heaven, would not allow himself any repose so long as he saw souls perishing in the shades of darkness, and his extreme desire of martyrdom seemed to give him a foresight of his approaching death. Having therefore settled his church and put all things in the best order possible, he set out with certain zealous companions to preach to the savage infidels and inhabitants of the northern parts of East Friesland. Having converted and baptized some thousands among them, he appointed the eve of Whitsunday to administer to neophytes the sacrament of confirmation in the open fields in the plains of Dockum, near the banks of the little rivulet Bordne. He pitched there a tent, and was waiting in prayer the arrival of the new converts, when, behold, instead of friends, a band of enraged infidels appeared on the plain, all in arms, and, coming up, rushed into his tent. The servants that were with the holy martyr were for defending his life by fighting, but he would not suffer it, declaring that the day he had long awaited for was come, which was to bring him to the eternal joys of the Lord. He encouraged the rest to meet with cheerfulness and constancy a death which was to them the gate of everlasting life. While he was thus employed, the pagans attacked them sword in hand, and put them all to death. St. Boniface suffered in the 75th year of his age, on the 5th of June, in the year of Christ 755. With him were martyred 52 companions, of whom the principal persons were Eoban, bishop, Winchung, Walter, and Alderhir, priests, Hammond, Strickhold, and Bosa, deacons, Vakar, Gundahar, Villiker, and Hodulf, monks. The rest were laymen. The barbarians expected to have a great booty of gold and silver in the baggage of the holy martyrs, but found nothing in their trunks but relics and books, which they scattered about in the fields or hid in ditches and marshes. Some of these things were afterwards found, and of them 3 books are still preserved in the monastery of Fold or Fulden, namely a book of the Gospels written in St. Boniface's own hand, a copy of a harmony or canons of the New Testament, and a 3rd book which is stained with the martyr's blood, and contains the letter of St. Leo to Theodorus, Bishop of Frejus, and the discourse of St. Ambrose on the Holy Ghost with his treatise De Bono Mortis, or on the advantage of death. The body of St. Boniface was first carried to Utrecht, thence to Mentz, and lastly to Fold, where it was deposited by St. Lollis, as the saint himself had desired. It is to this day regarded as the greatest treasure of that monastery. The continuators of Bollandus have given us, under the title Analecta Bonifaciana, a long history of an incredible number of miracles, down to this present time, which have been wrought by God at the relics and through the intercession of St. Boniface. He who sincerely loves God rejoices with this martyr to sacrifice to his honor his life, and whatever he has received of his bounty. With his whole strength he consecrates all his faculties eternally to the glorious and holy functions of divine love. He prays and labors without intermission that God alone may reign in his own soul, and ardently desires that all tongues may never cease to sound forth his praise, and that all creatures may have but one heart, always to be employed with the angels and blessed spirits, in doing his will, in loving him, and in glorifying his adorable name. Baronius pathetically exhorts the Germans to consider what men their apostles were, what were the maxims of the gospel they received from them, for with these their holy pastors and teachers, who will sit with the supreme judge at the last day, they will be confronted and judged by them.